In this video, we'll take a look at two new core concepts that were added to Arsenal in version 1.0.2. Has mapping is a new form of control to parameter mapping that's very flexible. It's somewhat similar to conventional MIDI mapping, but quite a bit more intelligent. Also, unlike MIDI mapping, has mapping is global. It's not specific to a particular set, so has mappings you create will work with any live set. There are three different types of has mapping currently. First, we have track-based has mapping. This allows you to control parameters on the current track. Let's take a quick look at how this works. To create mappings, you first need to enter mapping mode. Then you can simply click on the parameter you want to control and then move the control that you want to map it to. So I just mapped my first encoder to track volume. Now I'll map some encoders to frequency shifter. As you can see, the status bar guides you through the process. And finally, I'll map some encoders to transient master, which is the Native Instruments plugin. Now I'll exit mapping mode and have immediate control over those parameters. As I mentioned before, this applies to the current track, so if I navigate to another track, I'll immediately be able to control the parameters on that track. As you can see, this track doesn't contain any devices, but if I add frequency shifter, I'll immediately be able to control those parameters. The next two types of has mapping are just variations on that track-based theme. We have chain-based has mapping, which again applies to the current track, but more specifically, it applies to parameters on the selected chain of a rack on the current track. For this example, I'll use a drum rack, but this applies to any type of rack. The mapping process is identical to what we saw before. So I'll enter mapping mode, and then map some encoders to chain mixer parameters, and then map some other encoders to parameters in simpler. So now I have control over those parameters. And now I can navigate between chains and immediately control parameters on the chain that's selected. And finally, we have mix-based has mapping. This is just like track-based has mapping, but allows you to control parameters over 8 tracks at a time. Also, this allows for multiple pages of mappings. The mapping process here is slightly different because only the first control is used for mapping. So I'll enter mapping mode and map track volume to the first page, and then some EQ8 parameters to the next few pages. And then some glue parameters to the last few pages. Now I can select a page that has the mapping I want and control parameters across 8 tracks at a time. Also, notice that when I switch between pages, the status bar shows the name of the parameter that the page controls. All of this functionality can also be accessed from a button matrix via intelligent button sliders. I'll give you a quick example here with track-based has mapping. The mapping process is basically the same as what we saw before. So here I'll map my button sliders to parameters in analog. And now I can control those parameters. Up until the introduction of this concept, all modes were static, meaning they always did the same thing. An example of a static mode is the encoder volume mode from the encoder mix mode pack. That mode always controls volume across 8 tracks at a time. A simple example of a mutable mode is the encoder send mode, also from the encoder mix mode pack. That mode can control a send level across 8 tracks at a time. The send level it controls is determined by the name you give it in your mode settings file. So for example, if you name it send A, it'll control send A levels across 8 tracks at a time. If you name it send C, it'll control send C levels across 8 tracks at a time. So this concept generally allows modes to be more flexible and also have different sorts of settings.